Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Kimberly Belflower's John Proctor is the Villain as performed by the Penn State Theatre. So this is a performance review. So I really like the work that the Penn State Theatre does. I've seen a number of shows by them, and they're consistently excellent. John Proctor as the Villain was no exception. It was an amazing show, an amazing performance by an incredibly talented group of actors, and a really, really, really good crew, support team, production team, etc., etc. Directed by Stephen H. Broadnax III. Yeah. The only thing about the entire production, or the only thing about the entire theater going experience that bothered me, if I'm honest, is that most people in the audience did not give this performance the standing ovation that it very clearly deserved. But apparently, yeah, they have no taste. So, sorry. Anyway, so John Proctor is the Villain. This is a play that's set in a small town in Georgia in the English class in the high school. The students are reading Arthur Miller's classic American play, The Crucible, with their English teacher, Carter Smith. And this is during the height of the Me Too movement. Honestly, I was somewhat concerned going into this play because it was really inspired by, driven by, about the Me Too movement. And one of the risks with art, with theater, with literature that is strongly inspired by a political movement is that it becomes didactic. That is, that it's the piece of art's primary objective is to express its political message rather than to function as a piece of art. And yeah, I don't like that. I feel like it often, I don't generally find didactic works all that enjoyable. That being said, Belflower does an amazing job of not making this play didactic. It deals very, very complexly with the sort of broad cultural issues surrounding the Me Too movement. So it is basically a feminist play, which is, of course, amazing. And yet it deals with the multifaceted elements of this particular cultural moment. Issues like the relationships between individuals and how our sort of personal affection for family members, friends, colleagues, teachers, whatever it is, may make us less willing to believe accusations against them. Deals with doubt and misunderstanding. She deals with the largely paranoid right-wing view that masses of women would just start lying about being victims of sexual assault in order to destroy men's lives for no good reason. All of this. And all of this, these themes are sort of played out against the backdrop of the class studying The Crucible. And as they are studying, the world sort of interjects thematic things that align thematically with what they're experiencing in the text. So Ivy Watkins, who's one of the girls in the class, her father, who seems to be an important businessman or something like that in the local community. He is accused by his former secretary and then subsequently by another woman over the course of the play. And so Ivy struggles with being a feminist and yet wanting to believe her dad. And the other girls in the class who are Ivy's friends have that same kind of struggle where, so they formed a feminist club. Beth Powell, Raylan Nix, Ivy Watkins, and Nell Shaw had formed this feminist club. And initially the school was not keen on letting them do it. But yeah, it gets going. So they then have to sort of navigate this issue where, with the exception of Nell, who's relatively new to the area, they all know Ivy's dad. They have been around him. They have generally positive feelings for him. They are Ivy's friend. And so they have to deal with this issue of the sort of theoretical, abstract framework of believe women versus this real life instance where they want to believe the man accused. And so again, this is the complexity and the really, really interesting elements of this. And as the play goes along and the class sort of moves through reading The Crucible, Carter Smith, the teacher, his view of Proctor is very much Arthur Miller's view of Proctor, that he is a tragic hero. He is somebody who should be admired. He is the hero of the play. But the students slowly come to this conclusion, led by Shelby Holcomb, she was in the school and then she took a sort of extended, unapproved leave of absence, and then she's come back. Shelby basically sort of leads this analytical reinterpretation of John Proctor, arguing that through his treatment of the women in his life and through his refusal to take responsibility for his own part in what is occurring in Salem Village, he is in fact the villain of the piece. And neither Smith nor, I suspect, Arthur Miller are particularly prepared to accept that interpretation. But as the students work through this idea, they become increasingly convinced by it. What makes that argument somewhat harder for everyone involved is that Shelby pairs it with an accusation against Smith, the teacher, that he had been in a sexual relationship with her for months prior to her disappearance. And so that ends up sort of dividing the class, dividing the school, dividing the community, even more, it seems, than the accusations against Ivy Watkins's father. And so this is sort of the focus of the play, is how to deal with, and we don't find out absolutely for sure. I mean, Smith maintains his innocence, but in my reading, there's not much real question that Smith did what Shelby is saying he did. So, yeah. That being said, I don't think Belflower's play is simplistic or didactic. I think it is complicated and multifaceted and takes on these issues from a wide variety of angles, presenting multiple compelling viewpoints. So, in terms of the Penn State production, as I said, really, really amazing. These these actors are incredible across the board. And I do want to say, I think there are some parts in this that would be especially difficult to play, particularly those of Raylan Nix and Lee Turner. Raylan Nix, played by Nora Goody, and Lee Turner, played by Damon Mills. I think those are difficult parts because so Raylan and Lee had been dating for a long time, like 7 years, most of their lives. When he cheated on her, she broke up with him, as she should. Good work. He's not that keen on accepting that. And so there is a scene in which he waits for her in the classroom before class starts and essentially assaults her. It's not the most graphic assault, but it is nonetheless unsettling to watch. He grabs her and puts his hand over her mouth to prevent her from screaming. At one point, he kisses her against her will. He overturns a desk. And, I mean, I'll mention this because I actually think this is really, really important. Eric Raymond Johnson functioned as the production's fight and intimacy coordinator, which I think is super, super important. Big kudos to Penn State for making sure that they had an intimacy coordinator, a fight coordinator as well, but an intimacy coordinator especially. But to play those roles of someone being assaulted or committing an assault, that's difficult, right? Even though you rehearse it, even though you practice it, even though you know that it is scripted and it is not a real assault, it's nonetheless a difficult thing to do. And so Goody and Mills, excellent work. You did really, really well with difficult subject matter. The subject matter across the board is difficult. But everybody in this production was excellent. I've seen some of these performers before. Jimmy Hunter, who played Ivy, they're amazing. I saw them in Tartuffe playing Cleante. They're an amazing actor. I want to see them in everything I go to see at Penn State Theatre from now on. Lucy Martin, who played Beth Powell, really, really funny. She has great comic timing. Really, 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 really good. Cassidy Brown, who played Bailey Gallagher, that's such an interesting character because Gallagher is the guidance counselor, I guess, some form of counselor, and she really admires Carter Smith in the early portion because he had been like best friends with her older brother, and he was this sort of hometown football hero, etc., etc. She's just out of college recently and has come back to work at this school where he is now working as well. And she has to initially be the one to tell the students the administration isn't comfortable with having a feminist club, etc., etc. And Carter Smith then steps in and sort of says, well, what if we make it sort of an English-themed feminist club and I sponsor it? And so it's not initially clear that Gallagher is really on the students' side necessarily. But as the play goes on, she increasingly clearly is. And Brown did a really, really good job with that sort of dynamic shift in the character. Yeah, everybody was amazing in this. So Carter Smith played by Dante D'Angelo. I mean, it's such a complicated role because he is, throughout the whole first 2/3, supposed to be this sort of charming, supportive, slightly corny, but basically endearing English teacher. The kind of English teacher who sort of makes the material interesting and fun and whatever it is. And then by the end, there is supposed to be this sinister tint to what he's doing. And he did that really, really well. Let's see, who else haven't I mentioned by name? Shelby Holcomb, played by Drake Ariel. That's such a complicated part as well, because she is essentially an outsider who speaks truth to power and is penalized for it. And that's a difficult sort of role to play. And she did really, really well. Jazz Sword played Nell Shaw. I think this is one of the funniest characters. Ward's comic timing, her sort of ability to be simultaneously sarcastic, sassy, and a supportive friend made for a really great performance of that character. Derek Sanders III played Mason Adams, who I haven't really talked about in this review. Mason is another interesting dynamic character who starts out as this sort of dumb guy who doesn't know anything about anything really, and he increasingly gets into feminism, even though he's still, like, he's clearly on the path to learning. And that's rather endearing. Especially in contrast to Lee Turner, who seems interested in Feminist Club to the extent that he would get to talk to or be around Raylan again. And then the other students cast just as student and additional student, because they're not really that central. They have a couple of minor lines, but Tegan Jai Boyd and Emma Kate Angelo. Again, they're very much sort of peripheral figures to the entire action, largely there to fill out this classroom. But even then, one of the things I like about sort of supporting characters, minor characters, is to watch what they are doing when they're not actively engaged in the activity, because that's a hard thing, right? I think people often think about the difficulties of being like a lead role or something like this, memorizing all the lines, memorizing where you need to go, what your gestures need to be, all that stuff. And that's challenging, definitely. But I mean, if you have to just sit on stage for long periods of time or stand on stage for long periods of time without a clear thing to be doing, how you navigate that is actually quite difficult. And these students did an excellent job. These actors did an excellent job. Particularly Tegan Jai Boyd. I liked how much time she spent sort of doodling and taking notes and things like this. I thought it worked really, really well as what we call stage business. Yeah. So across the board, everybody, even the characters who had virtually no lines, the actors in this were really, really amazing. It was an excellent, excellent production.